Hello, and welcome to Conversations with me, Dr. Theo Blackmore, part of the Discover Voices Media Network. The latest podcast from the Discover Plus podcast series in conjunction with We Are the People at Bar University. I'm Theo Blackmore, Dr. Theo Blackmore, and today I'm talking to
Hayley Newman. Good morning, Theo. I'm a mum to two young ladies, actually, the youngest of whom has Down syndrome. I write a blog called Downside Up. I work for the Down Syndrome Association in the comms department, and I am a person-centred therapist offering counselling here in Cornwall.
Great, pleased to meet you. So I guess the reason that we're talking is because of your youngest daughter.
Yeah, Natty.
So she has Down syndrome. She's called Nancy.
Natty.
Natty. Great. So how old is she?
So Natty is 18, which, as it turns out, is quite a critical age when you have a learning disability. So we've just done a whole raft of, it feels like a sort of an endless admin task of moving from pediatric to adult healthcare, social care. We're coming to the end of schooling and college and looking beyond that. So 18 is a really crucial age in lots and lots of ways.
Everything happens. I've spoken to people before, and they say that everything just stops. They fall off a bit of an end of a cliff, and then they have to work really hard to make sure that everything's in place for the rest of the person's life, basically.
Yeah. It feels like it is a really big shift, and I don't think I was quite prepared for that. Even though I work for the national charity and have all this support around me from people like yourselves, I didn't realise that it would change quite so dramatically. And yes, there's quite a lot of thinking about what the next steps are, and putting together a package of interesting things for Natty to do to fill her time and with purpose and meaning.
And so Natty presumably went to a local school, did she, down in Cornwall? We're in Cornwall, aren't we? You're in Cornwall.
Yeah, we're in Cornwall. We're based in Truro. When Natty was born, I mean, we didn't know we were expecting a baby who had Down syndrome. We'd sort of avoided invasive testing for one reason or another. I'd had some miscarriages, so that just wasn't really an option. And I remember saying all kinds of, in hindsight, ridiculously naive and actually just downright wrong things, like, we don't care what the sex of the baby is as long as it's healthy. I mean, what if she wasn't? What the subtext of those kind of phrases that we say unthinkingly is that, the value of a baby's life, if they're healthy, is worth more than one who isn't. So all of those naive sort of, we don't want invasive testing because we don't want to harm a healthy baby, all those kind of ridiculous, which I'm ashamed to say now to you. So when Natty was born at home, it was a shock. And we were given I try not to say diagnosis. Down syndrome was identified. Diagnosis just feels too medical for me. So Down syndrome was identified about 6 hours after she was born. And it was a steep learning curve, as you can imagine. It was, I could go on all day about that, how that shock manifested itself and the thoughts that came into my head on that day. But we very quickly learnt, taking her as a lead, and her big sister Mia, who'd never heard the words Down syndrome before, so she had no sort of stigma attached to that or preconceived ideas about what that meant. And those two young girls just loved each other for exactly who they were. So we quickly learnt from Natty. Yes, she went to a local preschool, which was awesome. That was really good example of inclusion. If Natty couldn't do it, none of the kids did it. Everyone had snack on the floor on a carpet, or everyone had tiny chairs, and she was encouraged to be fully part of that, and they really believed in her. Then local primary school, little village primary school, and then the gap started to the gap started to widen, and the reasonable adjustments weren't being made, and the differentiation in the teaching wasn't there. Natty was being educated in a corridor by herself, by a classroom assistant. That kind of thing began to happen. And I think she became almost like the classroom mascot. You know, Natty's really cute and tiny and funny, but not actually an equal friend.
Sure.
And the birthday party invites dropped off. You know what I mean? That kind of
Yeah.
started happening. So we made the decision to apply to a local specialist school. I don't like calling it a special school, specialist school, for young people with communication difficulties. And Natty fitted right in. That was an amazing school. So, and then from there, she's moved to sixth form college, where she does foundation skills, life skills, and sort of pathway to employment. And that's where she is now.
Great. I mean, I remember reading something a long time ago, and it was written by a parent, and they said that, you know, when you're getting ready to give birth, at the early stages, she said this mother likened it to going on holiday. So you pack all your bags and you get ready with all your stuff, and you pack your bikini and you pack your towels and you get ready for the beach and you pack your sun cream, and then you get on the aeroplane and you take off and you land in Iceland. And it's still an experience, and it's still a life, and it's still a great holiday and a fantastic thing, but it's just not what you packed for.
Yeah, that reminds me very much of, so there's a famous poem called Welcome to Holland,
Right.
like Pearl, I can't remember the mum's name who wrote it, and it was, you think you're going to Rome and you end up in Holland, and it's still great. There are lots of Rembrandts and tulips and stuff, but you were expected.
Yeah.
I was given that poem within hours, minutes of the, and I'm trying not to say the word diagnosis, but let's say the word diagnosis for ease. And I found that really patronizing, because I thought,
Yeah.
you know, no, you have no idea what I'm feeling, that the depth of what I'm feeling, you know, the depth. And we were given it by our community midwife, who actually wept and said, this shouldn't happen to such a lovely family. So on the one hand, having Down syndrome was worthy of weeping, which sort of set the tone for us as parents. And then on the other hand, we had this poem saying it'll be fine, it's like going on a holiday somewhere different. But yes, in hindsight, you know, looking back, I think my advice to any expective parent would be expect the unexpected, and don't expect anything. Don't form preconceived ideas of what your child is going to be like. They are all different. We are all unique individuals, regardless of what our abilities are and our diagnoses. So,
and so you found the schooling system, so the integrated regular school system wasn't suitable, and so you moved to a specialist school, and they cater much better because they have experience, they know what they're doing, I guess, in relation to your daughter.
Yeah, I think moving Natty, so she will have been about 8 years old. I can't remember what year that equates to, 6, I think, or thereabouts. And it felt, Theo, like the first time in Natty's academic career, if you like, that I wasn't steering things. I wasn't going into school saying, how about, have you tried this? Have you learnt Makaton? Have you tried Easy Read? Have you tried Symbols? Have you tried Clicker? Have you tried, you know, please differentiate, please do this, please do that. Moving Natty to the specialist school, I could ease off. I felt I could relax. They knew what they were doing. They had many students who had Down syndrome. She wasn't blazing a trail on the first one. And there were a couple of things that happened in that mainstream primary school that made me realise that it was time to move Natty. So a couple of little examples, if we have time for an anecdote or two.
Yeah, sure.
One of them was her class it was their term for swimming, and it was a little school, didn't have a swimming pool. They had to get on a coach and go. And Natty happens to be a pretty good swimmer. She swims like a fish in her own fashion, mostly underwater, but she's a strong swimmer. And she came back that first day that the class had been swimming, and Mum, I'm in I'm in group 2. And there were 3 groups. There was the top group with the high flyers, the Olympic pathway, if you like. And there was the lower group with some children that couldn't swim, or some very, very weak swimmers. And then there was the middle group, and Natty was in the middle group. And I was like, wow, I'm so proud of you. And then my heart sank into my boots immediately, because I realised that was the first time in Natty's school life that she had ever not been at the bottom of the class, whatever that means, but in the typical way that they were being judged within that school system. That was the first time that she wasn't at the bottom and requiring extra help.
And she was how old then at that time?
She'd have been 7.
Right.
And I thought, this is going to start to chip away at somebody's self-esteem and self-worth, and the things that Natty's brilliant at weren't being valued, like being really hilarious, or doing a purposeful, well-timed fart to make everyone laugh, or being the sensitive friend that absolutely had a radar for how people were feeling, if they needed a bit of reassurance or a hug or whatever it was. Those things didn't matter, and that made me think, I want her in a system where she's in the mix, that she needs help with some things, that some things she can lead her friends, some things she can support others, sometimes she's in the middle. And that's specialist school brought her. And the other occasion was a parents' evening, and I sort of went into the room and sat down, shoehorned my bum into one of those tiny weeny primary school chairs, and sat down low with the teacher on the opposite side of the table. He had some paperwork in front of him, and I could read upside down that it said in big letters across the top, below expectations.
Yeah.
And I just thought, absolutely, this young woman has exceeded all of my expectations. She is phenomenal. She's survived. She's gone through heart surgery. She's learned to walk. She's learned to swim. She's made friends. She's smashed all my expectations. But somewhere in some office somewhere had decided that she wasn't meeting whatever targets were decided for her age. And so when she moved into that special school, there was no she was judged against herself, I suppose.
It's amazing the way the education system works or doesn't work, isn't it? So our son went through the education system, and he is very dyslexic. And they said, well, he rates very highly on his emotional intelligence, but don't expect him to get any qualifications. And they said that to us. Don't expect him to do well. Don't expect him to go to university. And he will always have problems with his academic work, as it were. Since that time, he went to university, and he now lives in Japan and speaks Japanese.
Yeah.
Married to a Japanese woman who's got kids.
Yeah.
Teaches kids in Japan English. And it almost seems like the system's set up to thwart us in many ways.
Yes. And those limits are set on our children or our people, rather than finding ways to support and encourage and nurture and help them to thrive, and all the reasonable adjustments and all the support, and whether it's tech or whatever it is that is needed. It's just kind of easier and cheaper to set a limit, isn't it?
I mean, you'll remember as well, because we're of an age, when we went to school, there was no such thing as a Disciplinary Discrimination Act. There were no reasonable adjustments, and there was just an awful set of terminology. Kids were moved out into different classrooms and were sat around tables, and what you say about Natty being educated in the classroom was kind of regular behaviour when we were growing up. Things have changed a lot since then, but to hear that she was educated, she was taken out and educated in the corridor, that's dreadful.
Yes, it wasn't ideal, and homework was coming home, long division or whatever it was, and I'm just looking at it thinking, we're not going to do that,
Yeah.
And it is, you're right, that you know, I am certainly of an age where not only were, I mean, all I remember at school is the awfully named remedial class.
I didn't want to say that word, but yeah, there was a
Awful.
remedial group. It's
Yeah,
just
just awful.
what does that even mean?
What is that? That catch-up group, and it was for everyone all under one umbrella. And you know, sorry to bring that word up, but that's what it was called. And I didn't go to school with anybody who had, certainly no one who had Down syndrome or any kind of learning disability, because not only were they not just in a separate classroom, they were completely segregated.
Yeah.
Probably not even being educated, because I went to school in the 70s. So, you know, people who have Down syndrome didn't have a right to education until the 80s.
Really?
The mid 80s. So, you know, they would have been at home or, you know, locked away somewhere. So that really is quite a shocking and sobering thought. And yes, we have come a long way since then. But it still feels like a struggle. And now that she's in college, I feel like I'm struggling again. And I'm going in and saying, but actually, you're teaching her stuff she did in primary school. And it feels like there's been a sort of a lowering of expectations again. And I'm again having to pick up at home and do extra. And in fact, we're looking out of county for, Natty is a phenomenal dancer, actor, comedian, whatever you want to call it, performer. And we're looking out of county for something that suits her, that can cater for her in a safe environment, that will develop those skills. And that again, that's another fight.
Yeah. There's there's greater visibility now of disabled people than there ever was, I think. I feel like anyway, or it's kind of higher profile now, isn't it? So, the kind of the mainstream media has as its kind of flagship is Strictly Come Dancing, isn't it? And so a couple of years ago we had Rose Ailey Ellis, and she's a deaf woman. And then last year it's Chris McCosnett, who's a blind man.
Yeah.
And then this year they had Ellie, and she's a woman with Down syndrome.
Yeah.
Who's a dancer, and I bet Hattie loved watching that while she was on.
Yeah, Natty loved that. And actually what she said, wasn't it, it just summed up representation in a sentence. She said, Ellie's got the same face as me.
Right.
Which was her way of saying, I can see by her face that she has Down syndrome, same as me. And yeah, and there was George Webster, who appeared on last year's, he has Down syndrome, and he appeared on, I mean, that's a flagship program, isn't it? And it's so important. And it's been so my daughter Natty was one of the UK's first models with a disability, and she appeared in a national back to school campaign for Sainsbury's when she was about 8.
Right.
Around about the same time that M&S were using Seb. And since then there's been a wave of models with variety of disabilities, physical, intellectual. And there's an agency called Zebedee that employ models with any kind of visible difference.
Right.
And that's so important, isn't it? We all need to see ourselves represented in the media. I'm flying the flag for women over 50. Where are the women over 50? Well, it's happening, isn't it? And it's so important. It's
beginning to happen. Are you watching Riot Women?
No.
Well, that's a series on BBC One on Sunday evenings at 9:00, and it's drama, and it's a group of women over 50 singing punk songs about the menopause.
Oh, fantastic! I mean.
Yeah, no, it's great, but it's you're right. It's rare. Women disappear. Men carry on.
Yeah.
So you have men in all walks of life, actors, whatever they may be, TV news presenters, whatever they are. Yeah. But then women all vanish.
Yes. And that's another reason why Ellie appearing on Strictly has been so fantastic, because very often it's the young, cute models who have Down syndrome that we see in advertising. But once they reach, adulthood, not so cute, you know. And she, or if we do see adults with a learning disability, it's kind of, they are sort of infantilized and sort of, oh, aren't they cute, and oh dear of them, and oh how love. But actually there was Ellie in all her glory, sexy and feisty and, you know, glittery and out there, which I think was also really, really important to see.
Yeah. So you mentioned, who do you work for?
So I work for the Down Syndrome Association, which is the national UK, the leading charity, who provides support from pre-birth throughout life, sort of all kinds of research, and they provide all kinds of training, education training, midwifery training, webinars for parents, and there's a work fit program getting people who have Down syndrome into work, which actually Natty is a part of, and she works at Dunelm. She has does a couple of shifts a week for Dunelm, so with support from the charity. So yeah, it's a great charity to work for, and it's they've provided support for our family a lot over the last 18 years, and it's really nice to be able to do a bit of work back for them.
So it's the kind of, you know, it's a radical shift. The same thing kind of happened to me. I have MS, and I was diagnosed with MS back in 1993, and it was a radical change in my life, physically and emotionally and all of that, but then also just my career changed, my life changed, my job changed, and everything changed. And so the same thing's happened for you. So you're on a completely different path. I don't know what were you doing before the birth of your children?
I was working as a teacher, but then I, you know, had basically a 20-year break to be a stay-at-home mum, particularly after Natty arrived, and she had quite a few health complications. And now, sort of 8 years post-divorce, I retrained as a counsellor, because counselling helped my family so much and me personally. And now I work with a lot of parents of young people who have SEND, in a counselling capacity as well. So yeah, that's completely changed the direction of my life.
So you said the word there, you said SENDs, that's special educational needs and disability, is it?
Disability, yeah. So parents who have just got a diagnosis and they're going through exactly what you described, that complete shift of lifestyle, thinking, all the feelings attached to, this is not what I signed up for, that grief period. I guess a lot of parents go through that the loss, and you will identify with that loss of life as it was, or loss of life as you expected it to be, or loss of the child you thought you were expecting. That's a grief process. Coming to terms with that, the reality, the minor adjustments you make with your lives, and then how life takes on a new perspective and goes in different directions and brings all kinds of new lessons and fantastic learnings, and the people that you meet. I have a very good friend, and actually she's a celebrity mom who has a son with Down syndrome. So Sally Phillips, you might know her from Bridget.
I know Sally Phillips, yeah, no, and her son Tom.
She's got a son called Tom, and Ollie has Down syndrome, and then she has another son called Luke. She has 3 boys, and she did a documentary that's worth checking out called A World Without Downs, and that's all around the ethics around antenatal screening. And we met. I was interviewed for that, a documentary, but we are really good friends now, and she has a saying that's so true. She's sort of, the special needs parenting club is kind of the club that no one wants to join. It's that a private members club. Nobody wants to join it, but once you're in through that door, you realize all the very best people are in there, you know, and it's kind of friends for life, people that have been through what you've been through, people that kind of get life in that way that, you know, when your baby is tiny, you go to baby groups, and I remember people moaning about how pureed carrots stained a baby grow, and thinking, get a life. My baby's facing heart surgery, you know, I don't care about carrot juice. And it just does put life in perspective. And I think we're the lucky ones. We live each day as it comes. That's what I've learned from Natty. You know, we live in the moment, and you know, kind of not to worry about stains on your shirt.
Well, it is amazing, isn't it? So I often think, so it's an amazing thing as well. We are the lucky ones because we live where we live in the time that we live. So if you go back in time 100 years, then it would have been an incredibly different situation for you and for Natty and for me as somebody with MS. Just life would be just unimaginably different as it was for everybody. 200 years ago, you know, I wouldn't exist and you wouldn't exist and Natty wouldn't exist. So it is amazing how things change over time, and things in the future will change again, hopefully in more positive ways. So I often think about that and about place and space. And so, you know, we live in the global north, and so we're lucky because we live in this country that we live in rather than somewhere which is much more impoverished with a much more difficult situation.
Yes.
So, you know, it's we do have to be thankful for the kind of the time and the space that we live in. Disability is changing in that.
There's a lot of truth in that, but also with something like Down syndrome, that is a double-edged sword, actually, Theo, because I remember saying to an educational specialist, you know, why don't we have, you know, you have specialist autism specialists that go into schools to advise. Why don't we have Down syndrome specialists? And he looked me in the eye and he just said, Hayley, your kids are a dying breed.
Right.
And that is the reality of the time that we live in that there are, and it's quite ironic after the poem Holland is one of the countries where Down syndrome has pretty much been eradicated completely.
Really?
100% termination rate. So of those who have had an antenatal screen. So there will be some babies born where parents have chosen not to screen, but 100% of those detected antenatally will have been terminated. So that is a double-edged sword, because that's a sign of the times that we live in, because we can test, we can screen so effectively. We have non-invasive prenatal testing, and then we have new, you know, the amniocentesis to 100% identify babies who have Down syndrome, and they're kind of the canary in the mine, because there are other conditions that we can't screen for, which are, I mean, Down syndrome really is not you know, I don't know how to term this, but it really isn't sort of that, oh my goodness, we must screen this out. But it's just because we can screen it out that we do.
That's amazing, isn't it? I mean, wasn't there a statistic that I read somewhere that families with children who have Down syndrome are happier than families who have children who don't have Down syndrome?
Yeah, I think it's Brian Scottco who did that research, and siblings of brothers and sisters who have Down syndrome, something like 97% said they were proud of their sibling and they wouldn't change them for the world. So, you know, and that's not to say, you know, our lives, there have been challenges, very serious challenges as well as joys, and the impact on big sister Mia, there has been an impact. She is the most amazing 21-year-old I know, probably because of having a sister with Down syndrome. She's thoughtful and considerate and caring, but there have been times where she has to have taken a back seat. Well, Natty takes all the attention, and she has articulated to me that has been difficult. You know, times in hospital, times where, just wait a minute, your sister's run away. What? Hold that thought. I'm just going to chase your sister or whatever. And she has articulated to me that she wished she had another sibling so they could share caring for Natty in adulthood, perhaps. So not to be underestimated and sugar-coated and glossed over.
No, I do remember, because a friend of mine has a daughter who has spina bifida, and she also has a son who is not disabled. And at one point, the son turned around to the mother when they were both very young and said, how come everybody comes up and shows their puppy dogs to my sister, but not to me.
Wow.
And
Yes,
so it's that kind of,
yeah. People used to come up to us in the street and say, wow, she's so beautiful, look how she, and her big sister was standing right next to her.
Yeah.
And the reply would always be, yes, we have two amazing daughters and they're both incredible in their own ways.
Yeah.
And one thing I've always been very conscious of is trying to carve out time to spend time with Mia alone, to do things that she wanted to do.
Yeah.
And interestingly, in adulthood, she has almost, and she won't mind me telling you this, I know, but she's almost grabbed our attention by going out and getting everything pierced, tattooed, you know, kind of being a bit of a party animal, and sort of, okay, now you've got our attention.
Yeah.
She's done it in a different way. But they are both very, very close. But yes, that thing of the times we live in being a double-edged sword for our community is an interesting one. So in the UK, the termination rate is about 92%.
So what is it in places like America? And
I'm not sure in America, possibly slightly lower. And then you go to, you know, countries where abortion isn't readily available. Catholic countries with far more young people who have Down syndrome. So yeah, that's pause for thought. And
it really is, isn't it? Yeah.
It's and I think it comes down to I'm very much pro-choice, and one of the things I've done is I've done quite a lot of work with sort of junior doctors and medics that are training, and it's all around giving really balanced, unbiased, up-to-date information about Down syndrome at point of diagnosis antenatally. And that isn't always happening, but it is getting better. But hitherto, you know, until a few years ago, it was definitely, I'm really sorry, it's bad news, your baby's got Down syndrome, I can book you in for a termination tomorrow. Sort of, you get more time to think if you want to keep that fridge freezer you've just signed up for, or change your mind about it, or whatever. But I think that is changing. The charity I work for is training midwives, and there's a lot better information going out. There's a lot of support, and a lot of families parents are simply choosing not to screen.
I mean, this must be happening with lots of medical conditions. You know, there's lots of things which must be possible to detect now.
Yeah.
Some of which are life limiting and life threatening.
Yeah, exactly.
And there will be lots of disabilities that will disappear, I guess, over time.
Yes. And then what happens when we can screen for something like dyslexia?
Yeah, and what happens when you can screen for MS?
Yes.
And so you start saying things like, oh, well, this fetus is more likely to develop MS or develop Alzheimer's or dementia, or, you know, are you going to say that somebody can't have 70 years of full, active, lovely life because they might get dementia at the end of it, or they can't have a life with MS? It completely devalues my existence and then Natty's existence and Natty's joy. And
exactly that. And it's that thing where somebody is deciding what your quality of life is, without knowing anything about your quality of life. They are not living your life. They don't know you. They don't love you like your family do. They don't know all the things about you that have nothing to do with your condition. And it is that idea of, oh, this is a fate worse than death. Nobody would want that, would they? Nobody would want to live with Down syndrome. Well, actually, they do.
You know, oh, I don't know how you cope. Oh, I don't know how you manage. Or if it was me, I don't know what I'd do. Or if that happened to me, I think I'd rather go off to, what's that clinic that they...
The euthanasia, whatever that is. And it's that, well, actually, you don't know till you do it, do you?
No.
Actually, you find out the other important areas of life. And it's that thing that was said to me a lot when Natty was born. Oh, only special parents are given special children. And I won't tell you what I thought about that. But that's nonsense. That's a nonsense. I'm not special. She's not special. I've learned on the job. I'm not a perfect parent. It is what it is, and you just get on with it. You've got two choices: you give up or you get on with it and make the best. And then you realize, oh, actually, this was wonderful. This was wonderful.
Yeah.
Mm.
That's incredibly profound. That's very deep. There's a lot in there.
There's always a lot in there, and
There's always a lot in there.
There's always a lot in there, and Natty has been my greatest teacher. She really has. And I often, when I'm working with my clients and they're bringing, what they feel to be an insurmountable problem to therapy, I'm going through a divorce, or I'm going through a bereavement, or I'm going through a work crisis, or whatever the problem is, a common life problem. And it's sort of saying to them, you will come through this. You will find some resourcefulness in there somewhere. And I don't tell them about Natty. I don't self-disclose. I don't tell them anything about my life or my struggles. But it's that ability it's having come through all sorts of, and I've come through far worse things than the shock of having a daughter who had Down syndrome. But it's, we are all far more resilient than we think we are.
Yeah. I've never predicted that I'd still be here 27, 30 years later, and it's, who would even imagine it, that you were going to get diagnosed, The irony being, of course, that I was very fast. I was one of the fastest in my school at running. I was at 100 meters, 200 meters, long jump, triple jump, all of those sort of fast things. Yes. I wasn't a sporty type, but I did, when I was sporty, I did those fast things. And now here I am in a wheelchair, and it's like, well, that's amazing. You can't predict that. But if I had not got it, then I wouldn't have met the person who became my wife, and we wouldn't have had the life that we've had. So, right. There is always a life.
Yes.
To be had.
Yes, and it is that. It opens doors, doesn't it? It opens doors. And what I'm hearing from you is that I didn't think I would be here, so I'm living this kind of bonus life.
Well, yeah, you get to see both sides, don't you?
Yeah.
There is a difference, I think, between people like me and people like Natty. So people like Natty who are born with their impairments and never know the other side. I was speaking to somebody once a while ago, and they're a wheelchair user, and they said, have you always been a wheelchair user? And I said, no. And they said, oh, that must be difficult. And from their perspective, as somebody who's always been a wheelchair user, they have a completely different take on it, because it's just how it is.
Right, yes. And I think that is a theme that does come up quite often when you're talking about disability issues, isn't it? It's the acquired, or the something that the onset was later in life rather than born with. There is a difference there, isn't there?
The language has to be different. So the language for me, the language about me and around me is all about loss. And the language for people who've always had an impairment isn't about loss, because that's just how it is. It's a different set of language.
And do you use that language of loss yourself, or is that the language that others put on you?
So the language others put on me, mostly medical.
Right. Yeah. So you lost the ability to. That's really, that's quite damaging, isn't it?
It's quite damaging, and you can't think in that way. You can't think in that way, otherwise you're living under a great big negative cloud for your entire life.
Yes.
And people I know who get through things better don't do it in that way. Don't think in that way. That way of conceptualizing loss, conceptualizing disability as loss, I think is just a very negative thing. We are more than loss.
Yes, that's a real deficit model there, isn't it? It's a real what you can't do. And that does happen around Down syndrome. Not that it's loss of abilities or cognitive abilities, but it is seen as a lack of, by many, a lack of the ability to. That's really interesting. And have you spoken to medical professionals about that? Have you tried to create a shift in language there?
you know, along the way you do, but it's only on a sort of, you know, one-to-one, you know, it's,
yeah.
I don't run a training program. I haven't set up a school. You know, it's like I'm not going into. I did think for a while about going into the Peninsula Medical School at Truro and running a course about the social model of disability rather than the medical model. So it's not about deficit and loss. It's about barriers and things that stop us from doing the things that we want to be doing.
Yes,
There
absolutely.
will always be people. There's always going to be people in wheelchairs. There will always be pavements. There will always be buses you can't get on. There will always be whatever there will be. The world is, you know, the world was built long before wheelchairs existed, so there will always be problems.
Yes, but what you're describing there is language creating a barrier, or language, and words shape our thinking, don't they? And that's what I was talking to you earlier about, the language around Down syndrome, and particularly around when it's identified, whether it's at birth or pre-birth. But the language for me absolutely shaped the way I thought about my daughter when she was born, and that really created the biggest barrier and stopped me bonding with her straight away. It was that, you know, the tears from the midwife, and, you know, I'm sorry, and the things that people said to me out and about, you know, oh, you could just have her adopted, you know, nice knowing you, but bye-bye, that kind of thing. Or, you know, people seeing a babe in arms and saying to me, oh, they don't live very long, you know. I knew one down our road and he lived to 40, and that's really old for them, and he was just in my arms. And it is that, you know, I'm sorry, and then all, just even other medical language like chromosomal abnormality and disorder, and all that kind of something wrong with language.
Yeah.
Rather than, this is just a type of person. Natty's a type of person. Down syndrome has existed forever, in every culture and every time, in every social strata. Just, you know, a naturally occurring sequence of pattern of chromosomes. But that language, and it was the whole, when I was pregnant, we need to screen, we need to scan, we need to make sure this baby doesn't have Down syndrome. That was the tone. And then the minute she was born, but look how beautiful she is, do you want to hold her? Well, hang on a minute. You've changed you've changed what you're saying to me. You've changed what you're saying to me. But it does, as you say, it comes down to somebody's opinion of what quality life years is, the phrase, isn't it? How many quality life years you have, Natty has, anybody has, and how much cost is attached to them, I think, is a quite possibly a
it's a part of the equation in the medical world, and this whole quality of life thing and the measures of quality of life thing, and what are those measures and who decided on those?
Who decided?
No, the key bit about the social model of disability for me is that it was the first time that disability was conceptualized and understood by disabled people.
Yes.
And it's a much more positive way of thinking about things.
Yes.
Because we can do stuff about that. We can move barriers.
And that's it. It's everybody in the room with their voice being heard, isn't it? And it's and that's why the Down Syndrome Association are great for our community. There's a group of people called Our Voice. They're employed, they have Down syndrome, they attend meetings in Parliament, they go into businesses and look at accessibility, they trial products, they look at policy, and they have input around that. So, as you say, it's the people that we're talking about being the leaders of the you know, change. And but yeah, I am very interested in language and the role that has. And one of the biggest things that is beginning to change now is that word risk. So when you're pregnant, you have I had a 1 in 257 risk of having a baby with Down syndrome. And now I think, well, risk of fire, risk of flooding, risk of death, risk of electrocution, risk of something really horrible happening. And I've shouted about that for years, and so have the charities. And now medics are starting to say chance or likelihood of your baby having Down syndrome. So
Yeah.
That's a big shift.
But it's also irrelevant, isn't it? You know, there's like a 1 in whatever it is, 10,000 chance of getting MS.
Yes.
Well, I got it. Hooray! What's the chances of winning the lottery? What's the chances of X? What's the chances of Y? You know, it's like, it's actually irrelevant at the end of the day because you get it. Somebody gets it. You know,
Yeah.
Down syndrome, likewise. You know, it's.
Yes. And you aren't just a tiny fraction number over another number.
You're not a number.
You are a person. You are a full person. It doesn't matter because that's your life. So yes, those chances and risks or likelihoods or whatever they want to be called are meaningless to us, aren't they?
They are.
They're meaningless to us.
It's been lovely talking to you. Is there anything that we haven't said that we should have said? I think we've said quite a lot.
I think we have said quite a lot. We've talked about. There's one other thing I might just drop in there, just for people to just signpost. So my blog is called Downside Up, which
downside up.
Downside Up. So 2 S's in the middle there. My big daughter and I wrote a book for siblings who have a baby brother or sister with Down syndrome, and it's called I Love You, Natty, which you can buy on Amazon. Other bookshops are available.
Local bookshops are available. Go to your local bookshop and order it. Local bookshops
and order it, and I will get the order through. Exactly that. And you can seek out a TEDx talk that I did as well. And if you just type in Hayley and Down syndrome, it'll come up. And that's something to watch, maybe, to cover some of the topics that we've talked about today, possibly a bit more emotionally. No tears and snot today, Theo, thank goodness.
No, not yet anyway. As I said to you, I'm sitting here with my tissues because my nose is running, but anyway.
Yeah.
Hayley, it's been fabulous talking to you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for inviting me on the podcast. Anytime.
It will be available sometime soon.